fragile peace shattered one morning when a rider delivered a letter, sealed with a trembling hand. It was from Eleanor, smuggled through a preacher in her town. Clara's hands shook as she read. Grace was trapped in a saloon in Red Hollow, forced to dance, and worse, her gentle spirit breaking under Silas Kane's cruelty. Lily and Rose were locked away in Dusty Gulch, owned by a man named Victor Slade, who ran his bordello like a prison. Eleanor alone had found safety with a kind rancher, but her sisters were suffering. "I have to get them out," Clara said, her voice fierce with resolve. Ethan met her gaze, his jaw set. "Then we will. They're your family, Clara, and that makes them mine. We'll bring them home." The journey to Red Hollow was a day's ride through rugged terrain, the air thick with the threat of trouble. Clara rode beside Ethan, her heart pounding with both fear and purpose. They hadn't gone 10 miles when hooves thundered behind them. Band of 6 roughnecks, hired by Silas Kane to protect his investment. Ethan's hand went to his revolver, his voice calm but lethal. "Stay behind me, Clara." The leader, a scar-faced man named Brody, sneered hand over the girl, "Cole, and we'll let you walk away." Ethan's shot rang out, grazing Brody's arm, and chaos erupted. Clara ducked low as bullets flew, her hands gripping the reins. Ethan fought with precision, felling 2 men before the others fled, but not before a stray bullet nicked his shoulder. Clara tore a strip from her skirt to bind the wound, her hands steady despite her fear. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan's eyes softened. "Yes, I did. You're worth fighting for." In Red Hollow, the saloon was a den of smoke and sin, its air heavy with whiskey and despair. Grace was there, her once bright eyes dulled, her dress torn. Clara and Ethan devised a plan. Clara would distract the bartender with a spilled drink, while Ethan slipped upstairs. But Silas Kane was no fool. He'd been tipped off, and as Ethan reached Grace's room, 2 of Kane's men ambushed him. Clara, hearing the scuffle, grabbed a bottle and smashed it over one thug's head, giving Ethan the chance to overpower the other. They freed Grace, her frail frame trembling as she clung to Clara. "I thought I'd die here," she whispered. They fled under cover of night, but Kane's men were on their trail, their horses' hooves echoing through the canyon like a death knell. The chase was relentless, the narrow trails of the canyon offering no mercy. Ada's heart raced as they pushed their horses to the limit, dust choking the air. Just when it seemed Kane's men would overtake them, a storm broke over the mountains. Rain turning the trail to mud and washing out a bridge behind them. They took shelter in a cave. The storms roared, drowning out the world. Inside, Grace's story spilled out months of cruelty, forced to dance for leering men, her hope nearly gone. Clara held her sister, tears mixing with the rain on her face, while Ethan stood guard, his silhouette a silent promise of protection. "We're not done yet," Clara said, her voice steel. "Lily and Rose are still out there." A week later, a cryptic note arrived, slipped under the door of their temporary hideout in a mining camp. It was from Jack Ramsey, an old friend of Ethan's, who now worked as an informant for the territorial marshal. The note was brief. "Lily and Rose in Dusty Gulch. Slade's compound, North End, guarded heavy. Tuesday's your chance." Ethan's jaw tightened as he read it. Slade's a snake, but he's predictable. He leaves his compound every Tuesday for a poker game in town. Clara's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we go Tuesday. We get them out." Dusty Gulch was a lawless sprawl, its streets ruled by men like Victor Slade. Ethan and Clara met with Sheriff Amos Holt, a grizzled man who promised to help for a price. The plan was simple. Holt would create a diversion, drawing Slade's guards to the saloon while Ethan and Clara infiltrated the compound. But as they crept through the shadowed alleys, Clara's instincts screamed warning. Holt's eyes had lingered too long, his smile too slick. Her fears were confirmed when they reached the compound's gate, only to find it opener trap. Out. Holt had sold them out to Slade for a cut of the profits. Ow. A dozen armed men surrounded them, rifles glinting in the moonlight. "You should've stayed on your ranch, Cole," Slade sneered, stepping from the shadows. Clara's mind raced. She'd seen a boarded-up mine shaft on their way in, its entrance hidden by sagebrush. "Ethan," she whispered, "the mine." He nodded, understanding. Instantly, as Slade's men closed in, Ethan fired a shot into the air, scattering them just long enough for Clara to lead the way to the mine. They dove inside, the darkness swallowing them as bullets ricocheted off the entrance. Clara's hands found a hidden tunnel, her memory of her father's old mining stories guiding them through the labyrinth. They emerged on the other side of the hill, breathless but alive, only to hear Slade's men regrouping. Inside the compound, they found Lily and Rose in a locked attic, their faces gaunt, their eyes haunted. The twins fell into Clara's arms, their sobs muffled to avoid detection. Ethan cut the lock with his knife, but as they slipped downstairs, Slade himself appeared, a pistol in each hand. "You think you can steal what's mine?" he roared. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cold as iron. "They were never yours." The standoff was electric, the air thick with the promise of violence. Clara's heart pounded as she clutched her sisters, but then a shout came from outside Jack Ramsey, leading a posse of marshals who'd been tracking Slade's crimes. The distraction gave Ethan the opening to disarm Slade, his fists connecting with the man's jaw in a satisfying crunch. The escape was a blur, the group racing through Dusty Gulch as Slade's men gave chase. They reached a narrow bridge over a rushing river, the only way out of town. Slade, bloodied but unbowed, blocked their path, his remaining men at his back. "This ends here, Cole," he snarled. Ethan handed Clara his spare revolver. "Stay with your sisters." He faced Slade alone, the bridge creaking under their weight. The duel was swift. Ethan's shot was true, and Slade fell, his men scattering as the marshals closed in. Clara's breath caught as Ethan turned back to her, unharmed, his eyes finding hers with a look that spoke of more than survival. The ride back to Ironwood was slow, sisters' wounds, physical and emotional, needing time to heal. Grace found solace in the garden, her hands rediscovering purpose in the soil. Lily and Rose, though fragile, began to laugh again, their voices filling the ranch with life. Eleanor arrived a month later, her kind rancher husband by her side, and the reunion was a storm of tears and joy. Clara, now carrying Ethan's child, felt the weight of her new family settle around her like a warm blanket. The ranch, once a place of solitude, became a haven of love and laughter. One evening, as snow dusted the plains, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch, the world quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. "I was scared that day at the auction," Clara admitted, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Scared you'd be another cage." Ethan took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I was scared I'd forgotten how to care."
"Are you?"
"Reminded me, Clara. You brought me back." Their kiss was soft but certain, a promise forged in fire and dust. The child, a boy they named Caleb, was born in spring, his cries echoing through a house now full of family. The Whitaker sisters, once scattered, built new lives. Eleanor, a rancher's wife, Grace, a healer, Lily and Rose, artists who painted. The plains, Clara and Ethan's love, born of choice and courage, became a legend in Ironwood, testament to the power of a single moment to rewrite a future. The sun hung high over Ironwood, Montana, in the sweltering summer of 1872, casting a merciless glare on the dusty square where the town's heart pulsed with grim spectacle. Ironwood was a rough-hewn place, its streets lined with saloons and weathered storefronts, where ranchers, drifters, and dreamers collided beneath the endless sky. On this day, the air buzzed with a tension that drew every soul in town to the wooden platform at the center of the square, where an auctioneer's gavel was about to shatter a family. 5 sisters of the Whitaker clan of honor, Grace, Lily, Rose, and Clara Jane, stood in a line, their tattered dresses clinging to their frames like ghosts of better days. Their father, Amos Whitaker, a man broken by whiskey and cards, had gambled away everything, including his daughters, to settle debts with men who saw human lives as mere collateral. Clara Jane Whitaker, the youngest at 17, stood at the end of the line, her green eyes sharp as cut emeralds, blazing with defiance despite the shame that burned her cheeks. Her auburn hair caught the light, a beacon of resilience in a world that sought to strip her bare. One by one, she watched her sisters sold like cattle. Eleanor, the eldest at 22, was claimed by a stern rancher from the next county for $60, his eyes cold but not cruel. Grace, 19, with a gentle spirit that seemed to wilt under the gaze of a saloon owner named Silas Kane, went for $40. The twins, Lily and Rose, barely 18, were bought as a pair by a man with a snake's smile who owned a string of bordellos across the territory. Each hammer fall was a wound, each sister's departure a piece of Clara's heart torn away. Now, it was her turn. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their eyes hungry or averted, as auctioneer Jed Harper, a wiry man with a voice like a whip, called out, "Clara Jane Whitaker, 17, strong as a Mustang, can cook, so, and tend a homestead. Who'll start at $20? Clara's gaze fixed on the horizon, where the rolling plains met the jagged peaks of the Rockies. Whispering of freedom she'd once tried to seize. At 14, she'd run from her father's drunken rages, only to be dragged back half-dead from a dry creek bed. Running hadn't worked then, and it wouldn't now. The bids climbed 20, 25, 30 each, number a chain tightening around her future. Jake Harlan, a brute with a ranch and a temper to match, shouted 40, his voice thick with whiskey and want. Clara closed her eyes, willing herself anywhere but here. When a new voice cut through the din, low and steady, like thunder rolling soft across the plains, $150. The crowd fell silent, stunned. Even Harper's gavel froze midair. Clara opened her eyes to see a man step forward, his silhouette tall against the sun. Whitaker-Cole was no stranger to Ironwood, though he kept to himself. His dark hair, streaked with gray at the temples, framed a face carved by grief and time. His closed black vest, white shirt-worn boots spoke of a man who worked hard and asked for little.
Whispers
Rippled through the crowd. Whitaker-Cole, the widower who'd lost his wife and daughter to a stagecoach robbery to winters past. Did you say 150, Mr. Cole? Harper stammered, his mustache twitching. Ethan nodded, his gray eyes locking onto Clara's with an intensity that made her breath catch. I did, but not for what you think. He climbed the platform steps, each footfall deliberate, and faced the crowd. I'm offering $150 for Clara Jane Whitaker. Not as property, but as my wife. My partner, my equal, if she'll have me. Gasps and murmurs erupted. This wasn't how auctions worked in Ironwood. Women weren't offered choices, they were bartered. Clara studied Ethan, searching for a trap in his steady gaze. She knew nothing of him beyond his name and his loss. Yet there was something in his eyes. Sorrow, yes, but also a quiet strength that promised more than chains. I don't know you, Mr. Cole, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the silent square. Ethan removed his hat, his fingers tracing its brim. No, ma'am, you don't, but I've seen you in town carrying burdens no one your age should bear. I've seen you help Widow Grayson with her laundry, share your bread with kids who had none. I'm not asking for your heart, Clara Jane. I'm asking to give you a life where you're respected, where you have a say. We'll figure the rest out together. Clara glanced at the crowd faces she'd known her whole life, now turned away in shame or indifference. Then she looked back at Ethan, a stranger offering her the one thing no one else had, dignity. Will you treat me as an equal, Mr. Cole, she asked, her voice steadier now. As God is my witness, he replied, his hand extended. She took it, her small fingers swallowed by his calloused palm, and felt a spark of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. The Reverend Amos Tate, a wiry preacher with kind eyes, stepped forward. I'll marry you right here if you're both willing, he said, his voice warm with approval. And so, under the vast Montana sky, with dust swirling and the crowd buzzing, Clara Jane Whitaker became Clara Jane Cole. The ceremony was brief, sealed with a handshake rather than a kiss, but as Ethan led her to his horse, Clara felt the weight of the morning lift, replaced by a fragile promise of something new. Ethan's ranch lay 3 miles outside Ironwood, nestled beside Silver Creek, where cottonwoods whispered in the breeze. The house was simpler, log cabin with a stone chimney, a porch that caught the sunset, and a garden of vegetables and wildflowers. Inside, it was clean but sparse, with a kitchen, a sitting room, and 2 bedrooms. This was meant to be a nursery, Ethan said, pausing at the smaller room's door, his voice thick with memory. For my daughter, Emily. She'd be for now. You can have it, Clara, for as long as you need. Clara nodded, sensing the pain he carried like a shadow. What was your wife's name? She asked softly. Margaret, he said, his eyes distant. She was my North Star. Lost her and Emily when bandits hit their stagecoach. I wasn't there to save them. Confession hung between them, raw and unguarded, and Clara understood that this man was as broken as she was, yet trying to rebuild. Their first weeks together were tentative, like 2 strangers learning a dance. Clara took to the household tasks, her hands deft at cooking and gardening, while Ethan worked the ranch, tending horses and mending fences. They spoke little at first, but evenings by the fire brought stories Clara's childhood dreams of seeing the Pacific, Ethan's youth in Missouri before he chased the open plains. Slowly, respect grew into companionship. Clara found herself smiling at Ethan's dry humor, the way he'd tip his hat to the horses as if they were old friends. Ethan, in turn, marveled at Clara's spirit, the way she sang to the chickens or coaxed life from the garden's stubborn soil. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Clara said, "You don't talk much, but when you do, it means something." Ethan chuckled, a sound rusty from disuse. Margaret used to say I saved my words for when they mattered. Guess you're bringing them out of me?